Leyenda del Trauco. This legend comes from Chile. It's a lot similar to Duende, and it has its differences, but I would kind of say this is a little bit more sinister and disturbing. It's said that El Trauco is said to live deep in the forest. It's a short-looking man standing around roughly 2 to 3 feet. Its face looks messed up and has a very prominent nose. It carries around a hatchet, which he also uses it as a cane to make himself look less intimidating. But the most noticeable thing that makes him way different than a Duende is the fact that he doesn't have feet. He just has stumps as legs.
Oh shit.
And it's believed that this creature acts like an incubus.
What is an incubus?
A male demon that has sex with sleeping women, which is basically what the Trauco does. So, despite it looking really, really ugly, El Trauco will make the woman think that he's a very, very handsome man, which ends up leading to them having sexual intercourse and impregnate them.
Yo.
And you would think that, oh, to avoid him, just don't go into the forest, right? But he doesn't just get his victims through the forest. He could go to somebody's house. So if he sees a woman that he's really attracted to, he would leave some signs to make his presence known, and he would wait till it's nighttime to enter her house. And starting that same day, the woman would begin to have very, very sexual dreams, and with those dreams, he'll be able to have sex with them. Also, if you mess with El Trauco and you're a man, he could just look at you and with his mind just break your bones. And also with his breath, he'll be able to make you very, very ill to the point where either you die within a couple days or even hours, bro.
I think I seen El Trauco because he fucked up my face.
Oh my gosh.
Crystal filed a lawsuit against P. Diddy, including some seriously disturbing allegations. Crystal McKinney was just 17 years old when she won a modelling competition through MTV. She ended up becoming very successful very quickly as a result of this and working with brands such as Tommy Hilfiger. In 2003, she was invited to a men's fashion show by a designer. She states in a lawsuit that she was told she was going to be meeting P. Diddy, and she was made to dye her hair really light so that he would find her attractive. She also claimed that they made her wear a very specific outfit so that he would find her more attractive, and she later kept this as evidence wrapped in plastic due to the nature of the alleged horrific incidents that would unfold. She states she was taken for a dinner with P. Diddy where he repeatedly tried it on with her. She claims she was later taken back to a room where P. Diddy was there with a bunch of other men all taking substances. She states that at one point he shoved her into the bathroom and SA'd her. She states that she eventually lost consciousness and then woke up in a taxi back to the designer's apartment. She states that she was left absolutely traumatized by the whole experience, and she's filed the lawsuits to seek justice for herself and for any other of his victims.
This pedophile artist still has an incredibly successful career after he was convicted. Meet Nobuhiro Watsuki. So Nobuhiro is from Japan. He was born in Tokyo, and he started drawing from a very early age. Eventually, Nobuhiro began publishing his manga. He started winning awards and began making a name for himself in anime. Now, a lot of people will recognize this guy's art, his works, but his most popular work has to be Rurouni Kenshin. I totally said that wrong, I'm sure. For decades, Nobuhiro was one of the biggest manga artists and authors in all of Japan. Like I said, receiving a lot of awards. But in 2017, Japanese police raided Nobuhiro's office. And inside of his office, they found 100 DVDs. Each one of these DVDs contained CP or CSAM. And all of these videos and photos featured children in their early teens. I mean, absolutely disgusting stuff. But what did the authorities in Japan do after finding this? Was he given a long prison sentence? 100 DVDs is a lot. Nope, he was fined about $1,500. That's right, he served 0 time in jail or prison and had to pay $1,500. And then shortly afterwards, his serialization of his manga continued, basically as if nothing had ever happened. Now, I'm not really a manga anime guy, but I'm sure that a lot of people on here are, and will definitely recognize this work. And I'm sure that a lot of the people that read this stuff don't know the history of the author. And in my mind, somebody who's convicted of a crime like this should never be supported in any sort of way. Financially, artistically, it doesn't matter. This is the type of guy that should be cut off from society. But he was pretty unrepentant, obviously, a $1,500 fine. I would definitely myself encourage Japanese authorities to go check this guy's hard drives nowadays. But as for now, he's pretty much untouched.
This 16-year-old murdered a 23-month-old baby. This is Dylan Shoemaker, and he was only 16 years old when he committed a terrible crime in 2013. He was babysitting his girlfriend's 2 little boys in Springfield, New York. And Dylan ended up fatally beating the older boy, who was just 23 months old. The little boy's name was Austin Smith, and Dylan Shoemaker punched Austin's head over and over to make him stop crying. and this caused Austin to have severe bleeding in his brain, and he died. On that awful night, Dylan Shoemaker was babysitting Ashley's sons, who was his girlfriend, while she was working her shift in a restaurant in Springfield. Dylan started to get frustrated with little Austin while babysitting that night. Austin wouldn't stop crying, and Dylan was afraid his cries would wake up the baby. So Dylan Shoemaker did something horrible. He put a pillow over Austin's head. Then he punched the pillow over and over and over. He kept punching Austin's head to try to make him be quiet. But this severe beating caused Austin to have serious brain bleeding. The bleeding in his brain would end up killing him, and Austin was almost 2 years old when he was killed. Dylan was arrested for this horrible crime, but he claimed it was an accident and he didn't mean to kill Austin. And during his trial in 2014, he broke down crying in the courtroom, pleading his innocence, claiming that everything he did was unintentional and it was just an accident. But the jury did not believe him, and they found him guilty of murder. Dylan was given the maximum life sentence of 25 years, though it was later reduced to a term of 18 years. Now, what I'm about to show you is the clip of Dylan Shoemaker crying and pleading for his life in the courtroom. But don't feel bad for him. Keep in mind, he murdered a 23-month-old baby.
I didn't mean to kill Austin. Ashley, I really didn't. I really think I did that. I didn't mean to hurt him. I can't take back what was done. I wish I could. I would give my life for Austin. I loved him.
A record will show that you admitted that on July 23rd, 2013, in a phone call to your mother from the holding center, you stated, and I got a quote from the court reporter, "I am a 16-year-old blonde. Probably all I have to do is cry in front of the jury, and they're going to feel sorry for me."
I don't think that there's ever been a story that makes me believe in the afterlife as much as this one. And although it's comforting, it's also really disturbing. So let's talk about it. On September 12th, 2008, at 4:22 p.m., a Metrolink commuter train collided head-on with a freight train in the Chatsworth neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. The commuter train was carrying 225 passengers while the freight train was carrying 3, and they hit each other going 83 miles per hour combined. This obviously caused mass casualties, with 25 people dying and 135 others really badly injured. Among the deceased was 49-year-old Charles Peck, who was a customer service agent for Delta Airlines at the Salt Lake City International Airport. Charles was in California for a job interview at a different airport, and this was really exciting to him because this would have been a promotion. And at the time, he was saving up everything he could so that he could marry his fiancée, who lived in California. The two planned to wait to get married until they both lived in the same state. So this job interview meant everything to Charles. So that day, Charles got onto the train and was on his way to his fiancée's house in Westlake Village when the trains crashed into each other. He was sitting in the first passenger car when the crash happened, right at the point of impact, and he died immediately. This happened so suddenly that Charles didn't even know what was happening, and he likely didn't even see it coming. Charles' fiancée was on her way to the train station to pick him up when she heard the breaking news about the crash on the radio. She was with his parents and siblings who also lived in California, so as you can imagine, this was absolutely devastating. Charles' body wouldn't be pulled from the wreckage for another 12 hours, along with many others. But for the first 11 hours of that, his phone kept repeatedly calling his loved ones. In total, his phone called his loved ones 35 times, and it was everyone he loved most. So his sons, who he had from a previous marriage, his siblings, his stepmom, and his fiancé. Every time they answered the phone calls, no one would speak. They could only hear static. And when they would hang up and call back, their calls to him would go straight to voicemail. At this point in time, nobody, not even search and rescue, knew that he had already perished. And with all of these phone calls, his family really thought that he was still alive and just trapped somewhere in the wreckage. So his sons kept telling him when they received his phone calls that they loved him and told him to just hang on because people were coming to get him. Hours and hours would go by, and the day would bleed into nighttime as they waited for any news about Charles. And at 3:28 a.m., the calls officially stopped. His family gave this information to search and rescue, and they were able to pinpoint Charles' exact location through his phone, which led them to the first passenger car. As they combed through what was left of it, they finally found his body, 1 hour after the calls from his phone stopped and 12 hours after the accident. What's crazy is the fact that despite his phone calling his loved ones 35 times, authorities never found it, even though the calls are what ultimately led them to his remains. That's so scary to think about, that even though they traced his phone directly back to him, they still didn't find it. An autopsy confirmed that Charles died on impact, and his body showed no signs that he lived for even a short time after the crash. After an investigation, this crash, which became known as the Chatsworth crash, was found to be caused by a phone, which is really eerie to me as well. It was found that the engineer running the Metrolink commuter train had failed to stop at a red light. This forced the train onto a single track, and coming the opposite way was a Union Pacific freight train who had had the right of way, and as a result, they crashed directly into each other. The engineer running the Metrolink commuter train had been texting while on duty. He was texting from the time he left the train station to just moments before the collision, 22 seconds to be exact. And it's crazy that this whole story revolves around a phone in some way. Charles' family believes that the phone calls were a message from Charles himself, letting them know that he's okay and that he didn't suffer. But it's now been 17 years, and whatever caused his phone to send all of those calls after his death remains a mystery.
On November 8, 2010, Jennifer Pan, she called 911, right?
Please just calm down. What some people broke into our house? Okay, just show us all his money. Okay, ma'am, where are you? Can you spell the name for me, please? Dad?
What the fuck?
Ma'am. Hello? Someone broke in and I heard shots like pops. I don't know what's happening. I'm tied upstairs.
That whole day was just a regular ass day. The dad ended up going upstairs to sleep, and then the mom was downstairs just watching TV. Waited till 9:30 p.m. She went to the door and like unlocked it, and then you just see the light in one of the rooms in the house flick on and off twice.
That's a sign.
And she had also sent a text to David, which was one of the hitmen, saying VIP access. They go in, ask for all the money, tied her to a banister, and shot her parents after.
Yeah, but the way she sounds, it sounds like she was not behind all this stuff.
Exactly. How could she have called 911 while she was tied? Just keep in mind it's a break-in, right? How the fuck are they gonna leave money in plain sight? And they're also gonna leave a Benz, a Lexus, when the keys were on top of the counter. Everything was still intact, bro. The only thing that happened was the mom died, but the dad, he was induced in a coma. And then on November 12th, the dad wakes up from the coma. The dad wakes up from the coma and says that she was in on it. When they were there, they were tied up and shit. She was walking around with them and talking and discussing the plan.
This is one of the worst pedophiles in world history. This guy was so bad, he actually created manuals for pedophiles on how to not get caught. I'm not kidding you, this is one of the most disturbing stories I've ever read about. Meet 69-year-old David Mold. Before his arrest, David was one of the most powerful people on an online dark web website that shared CP, CSAM images. But David wasn't just consuming this stuff, he was coaching other pedophiles on how to create it. That's right, David released manuals to other pedophiles on how to do all this stuff and not get caught. Basically, his manuals that he wrote 4 of them, included information on how to encrypt and wipe all of your devices to make sure you can never get caught by any authorities. So this guy wasn't satisfied enough with just abusing kids, he wanted other pedophiles to be able to abuse them freely as well. So David would travel frequently to the Philippines and Nepal, and when he was there, he would befriend young boys. Then eventually, after gaining these boys' trust, David would offer them gifts and money in exchange for them to do things for him. And while David was graping these children, he would oftentimes film this stuff and put it on the internet for other pedophiles to enjoy. These manuals that investigators found upon David's arrest were shocking and disturbing. In these manuals, David not only told pedophiles how to post and create this sort of stuff without getting caught, but he also informed them on where they could go to find victims, how to find and approach your victims, how to groom young boys, and he even went as far as to tell other pedophiles exactly what kinds of toys and candy they should bring with them to entrap children. This guy basically created like how to be a pedophile for dummies. Now, thankfully, he got a 21-year sentence eventually in court, which I will say is longer than most sentences that pedophiles get. In my opinion, it's still not long enough. It should be a life sentence, if not more. But yeah, this guy is one of the sickest of the sick, and I could not believe the details of this article when I was reading about this. Also, I'm on a journey to expose pedophiles and corruption, not only in our government, but in our society. So if you want to join me on this journey, go subscribe to my channel, The Conspiracy Files, or you can listen to the show as a podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. This video is absolutely crazy.
This woman shot her husband because she caught him watching porn. This is Patricia Hill, and she was a deeply religious person. She taught at a Sunday school for a local church and was married to Frank Hill for 17 years. But a huge issue that the couple faced was Frank's use of pornography. Even before their wedding, Patricia found videotapes and magazines at Frank's place. And for Patricia, pornography was unacceptable. Frank promised to stay away from them, but she said that she caught him with pornography several times after that. And in June 2018, Patricia said that she noticed a subscription for a porn channel on their cable bill. which she immediately canceled. When she came across the same charge the next month, she confronted Frank about the pornography. It was at this point that things took a turn. Patricia later told the police that she asked Frank to leave, but he didn't. She stated that she kicked the table, knocking some of his things down before coming back to the house, where she went to the shed and grabbed a .22 caliber handgun and shot Frank in the leg and another time in the head. Patricia then called 911, admitting to shooting and killing her husband. Now, what I'm about to show you is the 911 call made by Patricia Hill after shooting and killing her husband.
Yes, I need a police and ambulance out to... My husband's been shot. Who shot him, ma'am? I did. Were y'all arguing or something, ma'am? Yes, ma'am. Let me transfer you to the ambulance service, okay? Is he breathing? I don't know. Are you still there? Yes. Hold on. I'm transferring you to the ambulance service. Do you still have a gun, ma'am? No. Ambulance service. No, I want transfer. Yes. I need an ambulance and a police out.
And what's going on?
My husband's been shot.
Okay. And where's he shot at, do you know?
In the leg, I think.
Okay. Is the person that shot him still there?
Yes.
Okay. What's your telephone number? All right, Mecca.
I got him on the way.
All right, let us know when it's secure.
All right.
Opened her front door, turned on the light, waved from the window, and has never been seen again. What happened to this girl, and how could she just vanish into thin air? It was 2003 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Becky Marzo was 23 years old and doing an accounting degree. She'd graduated from Oak Creek High School in 1998 and got married at just 19. However, the marriage ended within a short period of time. They just weren't right for each other. She'd been a real family girl growing up, and she'd been very close with her mum, despite having a bit of a rough time when she was younger. She'd been treated for depression and also had to have surgery multiple times due to problems with her hearing. In 2001, she met a guy called Carl Rogers, and she moved in with him 6 months later. Now, he was much older than her and already had kids with another woman, and by all accounts, he was abusive. He kind of love-bombed her at the beginning, but there'd been some really serious incidents between the two of them where he'd severely beaten her, and once he'd even broken her nose. Obviously, this was really difficult for Becky's family to just sit back and watch. On so many occasions, her mum had begged Becky to leave this man. She told her how dangerous it was to stay with him, but Becky was in too deep. She was controlled so much. In the end, the relationship ended up driving a wedge between Becky and her family, and they became estranged. Becky ended up isolated. Now, Carl was clearly a very dangerous guy. Not only was he beating Becky, but he'd also got a prior criminal record for weapons and domestic disorderly conduct charges. In April 2003, Becky and Carl got into an argument and she filed charges for DV. Becky ended up deciding to go to Florida for a little bit of a break away from all this madness. She just wanted some space. She ended up staying there for around 2 months, but Carl was persistent and kept contacting her and her family. He was saying that he was going to get her, and it seemed like this relentless harassment eventually ended up wearing Becky down, and she came back to Milwaukee. It wouldn't be long before she would vanish. She was last seen in the late hours of the 15th of December 2003. She'd been at a bar called Conversations in the 3500 block of West Villard Avenue. Carl had called her that night, telling her to come home, kind of demanding that she get home straight away because he didn't want her out. I mean, Becky stood her ground and she insisted she was having fun and she would be back much later. Again, they got into an argument and Becky ended up shutting her phone off completely just so she could enjoy her evening. Her friend dropped her off later that night at around 2 a.m. She saw Becky go inside, turn the light on, and wave out the window to confirm she'd got in okay. She's never been seen alive to this day. Now, the same friend tried to get hold of Becky the following day because the two had arranged to do something again together the next day. Unsettlingly though, she just couldn't get through. Days went on, and her friends became more and more concerned for Becky's safety. They tried to file a missing persons report, but frustratingly, police told them that because they weren't family, they couldn't file the report. Now, Carl's account of the evening was extremely bizarre. He said that Becky was kidnapped and taken to Miami where she was working at a club. Now, I'm not sure why a kidnapper would come in the house, kidnap Becky and announce what their plans were with her and where they were going, and B, how would Carl then know what she'd ended up doing as a result of the kidnap? Police actually wouldn't file a missing persons report until June the following year. They said that there was no evidence of a crime. Time went on and there was just no sign of Becky, and that was until Carl began dating another woman, who then came forward to police to report another crime. She said Carl had held her captive, SA'd her, and nearly beat her to death. Now, this other woman bravely filed charges against him in 2007, but in the October, 4 years after Becky vanished, Carl unalived himself. Becky's friends and family all believed that he was responsible for her disappearance.
You will never convince me that the murder of this man wasn't a cover-up, because how was he found with 3 gunshot wounds to the head in his own bed, yet the sheriff ruled it a suicide? And why on earth would that same sheriff immediately have the bed and bedding where he was found burned, destroying any potential evidence? If you think you know where this story is going, I promise you don't. So let's talk about it. Eric Tomiyasu was 41 years old and lived in an extremely remote house outside of Hood River, Oregon. The house was surrounded by a massive fruit orchard which he owned and managed, and that was his job, and he really loved it. In June of 2001, Eric invited one of his friends named Diane over for a date. The night was going really well when later that night, they started hearing some strange noises coming from outside the house. At first, it sounded like someone was knocking on the side of the house, and then Eric's doorbell rang twice. The two then heard someone slowly walking away. I'd imagine that they were pretty creeped out because, like I said, Eric's house was extremely remote, so there shouldn't have been anyone out there. But the two decided to go outside and investigate. The only thing they found was one single shoe print in the dirt, and that was it. A few hours later, Diane decided to head home, so Eric walked her to her car and the two said goodbye. This would be the last time anyone saw Eric alive, as he was brutally murdered right after this, and the details surrounding this case are really strange. There are so many layers as to what really happened to him that night. A week would go by without anyone hearing from Eric. None of his family or friends could get a hold of him, and he started missing a lot of work meetings. So his good friend and business partner, Don Dixon, decided to go over to his house to check on him. Don either had a spare key or was able to easily find it, and after letting himself inside, he stumbled across a gruesome scene. He found Eric deceased, laying naked in his bed, and at this point in time, he was extremely decomposed. For reasons unknown, Don then called Eric's sister and told her what he had just found, but then he said something really bizarre. He told Eric's sister, completely unprovoked, that he, quote, couldn't see any exit wounds on his body. Keep this in mind because it is really important. So obviously Don then calls the police, and Sheriff Joe Wampler with the Hood River County Sheriff's Office arrives at the scene. Almost immediately, Sheriff Wampler says that there is no evidence of foul play, and he states that Eric died of natural causes. This is kind of crazy to me because, like I said, Eric was pretty badly decomposed. So how do you know immediately if there was or wasn't any foul play? He then proceeds to have Eric's bed and bedding that he was found on burned, and he said he did this because he wanted to be a nice guy and not subject his family to any more trauma. After this, Eric's body was then transferred to the medical examiner's office, and I'm sure authorities thought that the case was closed. But then, 2 days later, and after careful examination, the ME ruled that Eric did not die of natural causes, but in fact, he had been shot 3 times in the head, and at the time of being found, he had been dead for at least 5 days. This was not at all what Sheriff Wampler said happened, and this is where things start to not add up and where rumors start to spread. Authorities then began conducting a real investigation into what happened to Eric, and they started with his house. There were no signs of a break-in or a robbery, and it appeared as if Eric had been shot while he was sleeping. A struggle didn't ensue, and this was found to be an execution-style murder. It became clear that whoever did this walked into Eric's house with the sole purpose of killing him. Unfortunately, all of the potential evidence that was found on his bed and bedding was destroyed when it was all burned, so it made this investigation really difficult. It also didn't help that the murder weapon, which was obviously a gun, was never found. So authorities interviewed the last person Eric was known to be with, which was his friend Diane. Diane told them about their date and how they heard someone lurking outside of his house, almost as if someone was messing with them. She then remembered the single shoe print that they both saw outside of the home, but when authorities went back to look for it, it was gone. There had been a massive rainstorm and it was washed away. Eric's family said that he was extremely kind and didn't have a single enemy in the world, but someone wouldn't do this just randomly, and it didn't take long for a string of suspects to be found. The first suspect was Sheriff Wampler himself. Not only did he immediately burn all of the potential evidence, there was also a rumor going around that Eric could have been having an affair with his wife. This rumor came from Eric's friend and business partner Dawn. Dawn said that shortly before he was murdered, Eric mentioned something about dating an older Polynesian woman, and this just so happened to match the description of Sheriff Wampler's wife. But of course he denied having anything to do with Eric's murder, and he also denied that his wife was cheating on him with Eric. Suspect number 2 was one of Eric's best friends, Eric Smith, who he also worked with. According to Dawn, Eric and Eric Smith had a heated argument about money. He overheard Eric saying that he was concerned that Eric Smith was stealing money from the business, about $60,000 to be exact. Eric Smith has denied that there was ever an argument between the two. Authorities looked into their finances and found no evidence of any missing money, and there were no financial issues between the two at all. And not so shockingly, suspect number 3 is Don Dixon, who says he was really close with Eric. Interestingly, Eric's friends and family say that he might not have been as close with Eric as he was letting on. Eric Smith told police that not long before Eric died, he told him that Don wasn't really a friend. He was just someone he had bought a pesticide spray from one time. And adding to this mystery is the fact that most of Eric's friends didn't even know who Don was, which completely contradicts his claims that he was like best friends with him. If that's true, it's weird that he either had a spare key or knew where it was to Eric's house, but it would explain why there were no signs of a break-in. Another weird thing is what Don said to Eric's sister right after seeing his body. He said that he saw no exit wounds on his body, but at the time, not even the sheriff knew that he'd been shot. His body was really decomposed, so there really wouldn't have been a way for him to know this unless he pulled the trigger himself, because most normal people don't have any training when it comes to looking at a dead body. And all I can say is that if I found my best friend deceased, I definitely wouldn't be up close examining their body. That would be weird and really scary. It's also pretty odd that all of these rumors and speculation about the other 2 suspects came from Don. It kind of seems like he may have been trying to get the attention off of him and onto someone else. All 3 suspects took a polygraph test, and while Sheriff Wampler and Eric Smith passed, Don's results came back as inconclusive. Eric's friend Diana believes that whoever was messing with them outside of his house that night was the killer. And in a more recent twist, police have named her ex-boyfriend as a potential suspect. I guess he was known to have some stalking-like tendencies, kind of like what they experienced on the night Eric was killed. And although the ex is considered high on the suspect list, he has never been publicly identified, nor charged in connection to this case. Sheriff Wampler has since apologized for burning Eric's mattress so quickly, but he still believes that even though he did that the crime scene was still processed correctly. I don't get how he can say that when the main piece of evidence was destroyed before the investigation even began. And I don't know if he meant well when saying this, but he told Eric's sister when she complained that he burned private property that he would buy her a new bed since he destroyed the old one. It's believed that the person responsible for this heinous crime personally knew Eric, and they also knew where his remote house was and the exact layout of it as well. But it's now been 23 years. Whoever killed Eric is still out there, and whatever happened to him that summer night remains a mystery.
However, according to the phrase, you can't make this stuff up, might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Bohemian Grove.
Oh my gosh, I know what you're talking about, bro.
For people who aren't familiar with Bohemian Grove, it was a conspiracy before, but it was proven to be true by Alex Jones. It's out in the public. It was a place in California where all of these elites or celebrities, whatever, people with a lot of money, specifically men, they would go to the woods and worship this owl god. They would be dressed in like wizard costumes, whatever, and then they would burn these stick-like figures and they would do these fake sacrifices. And recently, there was a guy who snuck into the old hideout. His name was Dancer1 on YouTube. That's supposed to be the owl. You see the wings?
It's the owl statue. What the fuck? No way. Oh, that's hollow. Yeah.
That's so creepy, bro.
I've seen images, bro, and that's literally like, it's just fucked up because of the
covered in vegetation and stuff like that. These are videos that Alex Jones took. Bro, that's a lot of heads.
Before the cremation of Care, all the Bohemian Club members begin a massive feast of revelry.
Hail, fellowship's eternal flame! Once again, midsummer sets us free!
Shh. This is my secret account. I don't know what I'm going to be posting on here, but you start telling everybody, it'll ruin all the fun.
The guy in that video is named John Robert Bell, otherwise known as Joe Robe here on TikTok. Before John deleted his account, he had millions of followers and over 100 million likes, meaning that he was very popular here on TikTok. However, the world would soon turn against John when they found out that he was a pedophile. You see, on July 21st, 2021, a TikTok user named Dylan uploaded a disturbing video. Dylan stated that John, in the photo here, had tried to groom him. According to Dylan, John actually offered to rent a one-bedroom Airbnb to celebrate his 18th birthday, and he stated that he wanted to purchase alcohol for the minor. When Dylan asked John if there would be other people in this Airbnb or if it would just be those two drinking, John allegedly kept dodging the question. In addition, Dylan stated that John had joined him and his friends on a Zoom call, with their ages ranging from 15 to 19. And Dylan stated that John encouraged the group, including the minors, to take a BDSM test and send him their scores. Now, these are some pretty serious grooming allegations against John, and even though he decided to try fight them for a moment, he just deleted everything. That's why you never hear from Joe Robe anymore, because he deleted his account after being exposed as the creep that he is. If you want to join me on my journey to expose pedophiles and corruption, go listen to my new podcast, The Conspiracy Files, available on all streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
This teacher, nicknamed Bunda Becky by students, has been put in prison for doing this with teenage boys. Rebecca Joins was a 30-year-old teacher at a school in Manchester. She was nicknamed Bunda Becky by her students. It's reported that she always laughed off the inappropriate comments and was quite flattered by the attention. She would later claim that loneliness made her do the terrible things that she did. She initially connected with some of the teenagers at school over Snapchat. She then lured one boy to meet her in secret. She took him on a shopping spree, as seen on CCTV here, and bought him a £350 Gucci belt. Now, after going round the shops at the Trafford Centre with him, she took him back to her flat in Salford Quays. Warning the student that no one had better find out, she engaged in an S relationship with the boy. Now, the boy's mum actually got suspicious when he returned home with a love bite on his neck. The boy's mum went to the school and reported her suspicions. Police actually got involved at this point, but meanwhile, Becky started meeting up with another student. Known simply as Boy B, the teenager began an S relationship with Becky, and what happened next would shock everyone. She made him a treasure hunt at her flat. She arranged rose petals and hid little notes around her flat for him to find. The treasure hunt ended in a final present, a baby grow stating best dad. She was pregnant with the teenager's baby. By now, police were involved, as I mentioned, and when she gave birth to the child, it was immediately taken off her. She was arrested for S activity with 2 children and was found guilty. She will spend 6.5 years in prison.
This little boy went missing 6 years ago, but he was just found alive walking down a dark road in France. This story is actually insane. This is Alex Batty. He was 11 years old when he went missing during what was supposed to be a 2-week family vacation to Spain, but the details surrounding his disappearance are odd. In 2017, Alex was living with his grandma, who was his legal guardian in Oldham, England. His dad left when he was 2 years old, and ever since he was raised by his mom Melanie and his grandma, who eventually took over guardianship. Alex's grandma agreed to let him go on a vacation with his mom and grandpa to Spain, but that was 6 years ago, and that was the last time that she ever saw him. His disappearance became widely known, but there was literally no trace of him. But just last week, Alex, who is now 17, was found walking down the road in the middle of the night near the city of Toulouse in France. A delivery driver spotted him walking alone in the rain with a flashlight, backpack, and skateboard, and he offered him a ride. Alex agreed, and once he got in the car, he initially gave the driver a fake name, but ultimately he told him that his real name was Alex Batty and that he was kidnapped by his mom 5 years ago in Morocco. Alex told him that he had walked for 4 days and 4 nights through the rugged Pyrenees, sleeping in the light and hiking in the dark, trying to get to a big city to seek out authorities. He said that to survive, he ate what he could find in fields and gardens. He then stated that he'd been living a nomadic lifestyle in Spain, Morocco, and most recently France with his mom and grandpa as part of a spiritual community. He said that they would never stay in one place for too long, would grow their own food, they meditated, and contemplated reincarnation. According to Alex, he carpooled with a community of about 10 people doing odd jobs to get by, and they would carry solar panels with them for energy. It was only after his mom said that she wanted everyone to move to Finland that Alex decided he wanted to leave the group. He told the driver that picked him up that he had had enough and that he was 17 and needed a future, but that he couldn't see a future there. The driver took him to the police after looking him up online and finding out that he was indeed a missing child. Authorities then notified Alex's grandma that he was found, which she's obviously very excited about. According to her, Alex disappeared in 2017 because of disagreements over his care, and the fact that his mom and grandpa were interested in pursuing an alternative lifestyle with him. Alex told authorities that he was never physically abused, but that he had not attended school in the past 6 years, and he was reportedly in good health when he was found. Alex has since been reunited with his grandma. As for his mom Melanie, she is currently wanted by British police in connection to his disappearance, and she may be in Finland. His grandpa David is believed to have died about 6 months ago. Manchester police are still investigating the circumstances around Alex's disappearance and whether or not there should be a criminal investigation. What do you guys think about this case?
Kind of creepy in itself because it's about AI, a specific AI tool that was created by OpenAI. And OpenAI is the same company that made ChatGPT. And they also made DALL-E 3. DALL-E 3 is that program where you type in something and like it makes a picture.
I know what you're talking about.
And now they made an AI video tool called Sora. And this shit is fucking crazy, bro. Just the amount of progression that we've had within a year, bro. This AI video was of Will Smith eating spaghetti a year ago.
I remember that. Yeah, that's The Rock eating rocks. I saw that shit too.
But you see how like weird and like
distorted and shit.
Yeah, bruh. If you wasn't looking for imperfections to see if it was an AI video, you wouldn't be able to tell. It looks like a movie. All this shit is AI.
That's AI right there.
It's AI, bruh.
If you didn't tell me, I wouldn't have been like, oh, that's AI, the fuck?
We thought robots and AI was going to take the boring jobs, the jobs that we don't want to do, but it's scary to think about AI is taking videographer jobs, photography and shit, and basically taking all the fun out of creative jobs, so everything looks lifeless and soulless.
We're going into the future, and it's scary as fuck, because I mean, we're like in the middle of it, bro, in like maybe like 10, 20 years.
I say 10 years, bro.
We're going to see a big ass difference, bro.
Magician David Copperfield is one of the biggest creeps on Earth. And trust me, you're going to see why in this TikTok. So if you don't know David Copperfield, he's a world famous magician that really got famous in Vegas. And for years, his magic tricks have entertained people from across the world. But in May of this year, he was accused by 16 different women of schmexual misconduct. So these claims stretch from the 1980s all the way up to 2014. And some of the women who brought these allegations against David claimed that they were under the age of 18 when he assaulted them. At least 3 of these women claim that David drugged them before having relations with them, which obviously were not consensual. He's also been accused of 4 instances of either groping women or making them grope him on stage during performances. One of these accusers claims that she was 15 years old when she met David, and that they stayed in touch over the phone. Yes, that means David essentially groomed her, and when she turned 18, they had a consensual encounter, but now years later, the woman has realized that David groomed her from the age of 15. Now, David Copperfield and Jeffrey Epstein were very close friends. And in my next TikTok, I'm going to explore their relationship and some of the disturbing notes found at Epstein's house about David. But with all of these women coming forward against David, 16 different women, and also some of them claiming that they were minors when they were either assaulted or groomed, it seems that it's more than likely that David was participating in Jeffrey Epstein's human trafficking ring when it was in operation. So why hasn't he been prosecuted on any of these charges? 16 women making claims against him, pedophile claims, and he's been linked with one of the world's most infamous human traffickers, and yet no investigation. That's how this whole thing seems to go. If you want to hear my expose on Jeffrey Epstein, it's over an hour long. Go listen to the first episode of my new podcast, The Conspiracy Files. It's available now on all streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
These are the UK's youngest killers since James Bulger was murdered. Unless you've lived under a rock, you probably know about the harrowing case of James Bulger. He is a little boy who was murdered in 1993 by 2 11-year-old boys. Did you know though, recently in Wolverhampton there was another shocking murder by 2 children. On the 13th of November 2023, 19-year-old Sean Seaside was at Stowlawn playing fields in Wolverhampton with a friend. Now Sean had dreams of becoming an engineer and he was really well liked by his friends and peers. Him and his friend had been chatting on a park bench at around 8 p.m. that evening, talking about their plans for Christmas. Then he caught the eye of 2 12-year-olds. Suddenly, in an unprovoked attack, the 2 children lunged at Sean. They pulled out a machete and said, "Run, bro." Now Sean and his friend obviously started running for their lives, but unfortunately Sean tripped up and was on the floor. The boys then hacked at him as he lay helplessly on the ground. The one boy punched him and stamped on him. Unfortunately, Sean stood no chance. After the murder, police searched the boys' homes and found an arsenal of weapons. Chillingly, one of the boys had actually posed on social media with a machete just hours before the murder. They also had disturbing photos and Google searches on their devices. Now, currently the 12-year-olds are having their identities withheld from the public, but the judge is considering revoking this. They have both been found guilty of murder. The boys' disturbing Snapchat conversation has been made public recently, in which they discussed the killing. One stated, "It is what it is." The other replied, "I'm scared, man." The other said back, "I'm not, I don't really care."
The most disturbing movies. It was also low-key banned, and it took a long time for it to fully release because of how controversial and disturbing the movie was.
Okay.
The Poughkeepsie tapes. It's a mockumentary of a serial killer, and it's just a bunch of found footage, specifically with all of his victims.
Go pop it.
What?
Pop it! What is your name? I understand. What is your name?
And throughout the whole movie, it goes back from an interview to the detectives, sheriffs, and also the actual Poughkeepsie tapes revolving how he killed, tortured, and mentally abused his victims and shit. The very first tape that it shows is one of the very first victims in the movie, which was a 8-year-old little girl.
I don't remember that at all, bro. What?
You see the serial killer starts talking to the little girl, kind of knocks her out, and then he starts dragging her into the car, and obviously
takes her.
One of the most disturbing parts, the serial killer kills a couple, and at the end of the clip you see how he had decapitated the boyfriend and sewed the head onto the stomach of the girlfriend. The other one was obviously Cheryl Dempsey, kept in there for mad long. At the end of the movie was mentally damaged and shit. She had Stockholm syndrome, basically trying to say that this whole time her abuser loved her and stuff.
He loved me. Nobody ever lets me say it, but it's true. He didn't mean to leave me, and someday he's gonna come back to me.
Whomever coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This is one of the most disturbing images that you will ever see for multiple reasons. Let's talk about it. This is an x-ray of the pelvis of serial killer and cannibal Albert Fish. Albert had a serious self-harm and sexual mutilation kink, and in this x-ray, 29 self-embedded needles were lodged into his pelvic region. This in itself is incredibly disturbing, but who Albert Fish was and what he did is horrifying. Albert Fish, also known as the boogeyman in the Brooklyn Vampire, S.A.'d, killed and cannibalized at least 3 children between 1924 and 1928, but he was a suspect in at least 10 other murders and bragged about possibly having 100 victims. After Albert's dad died when he was really young, his mom placed him into an orphanage where he was often physically abused, but after a while he began to enjoy the physical pain from the beatings. By the age of 12, he began drinking urine and eating feces and would often spy on other young boys and watch them undress. By 20, he began S.A.ing little boys, mostly under the age of 6, and it was around this time that he married a woman named Anna. They went on to have 6 kids together. Although his life seemed normal on the outside, his secret disturbing behavior would begin to escalate when in 1910 he met a teenager named Thomas. The two began a sadomasochistic relationship, and just 10 days into the relationship, Albert took him to an old farmhouse where he tortured him over a period of 2 weeks. He originally wanted to kill Thomas and dismember his body to take home, but it was really hot out at the time, and he said he feared someone would notice. So instead, he cut off half of Thomas's poured peroxide over the wound, wrapped it in a towel covered in Vaseline, and then gave him $10. Albert then left him there and never looked back. A few years later, his wife would leave him, and it was at this point that Albert began having hallucinations and began to self-harm. This is where he picked up the habit of self-embedding the needles into his pelvic region. He would also repeatedly hit himself with a nail-studded paddle, amongst other really disturbing things that I cannot say on here. At this point, Albert would escalate to torturing, mutilating, and murdering young children because he said that God was commanding him to do so. He would use tools that he called his implements of hell, which included a meat cleaver, a butcher knife, and a handsaw. He went on to murder 10-year-old Grace Budd in the summer of 1928 after the Budd family put out an ad in the newspaper. Grace's brother Edward was looking for work, and Albert responded to the ad under the pretense of wanting to hire Edward. But instead he saw Grace, and he convinced her parents to let him take her to his niece's birthday party, which unfortunately was a complete lie. Instead, Albert took Grace to an abandoned house in Irvington, New York, where he strangled her to death. He then decapitated her and dismembered her body and ate most of her remains over the next few days. One of the most disturbing things about Albert was that he was known to write disturbing letters to the victims' families, and that's exactly what he did to the Budd family. Albert sent them an extremely gruesome and disturbing letter detailing what he did to Grace, how it took 9 days to eat her entire body. And in this letter, he also detailed other horrific child murders. One was the murder of 9-year-old Francis McDonnell, who disappeared after playing catch with some friends. He was later found hanging from a tree in a wooded area near his home. He had been essayed and strangled with his suspenders. He also had extreme lacerations to his legs and stomach, and his left hamstring had almost entirely been stripped of its flesh. The next confession was the murder of 4-year-old William Gaffney. On February 11th, 1927, William was playing in his apartment hallway with a 3-year-old named Billy and Billy's 12-year-old brother. After a while, the 12-year-old stepped away, and it was at that moment that both the little boys disappeared. Billy was later found on the apartment roof, and when police asked him what happened to William, Billy said that the boogeyman took him. A witness later identified Albert as the person who kidnapped William that day, and although William's body was never found, Albert explained in great detail what he did to him in a letter that he wrote. Albert wrote how he cooked and ate his body parts in a stew. Albert was arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Grace Budd, in which he was convicted. He was executed by electric chair on January 16, 1936, at the age of 65 years old. Right before his execution, Albert wrote down his final confessions and gave them to his lawyer, but his lawyer said that he would never show them to anyone because of how disturbing they were. Albert Fish is one of the scariest men to ever exist.
I don't know if you ever heard about the Island of Dolls.
All I've heard about is that it's literally just an island by itself with a bunch of dolls.
But have you heard about the legend behind it?
I've never heard about that.
In the 1950s, there was a man. His name was Julian Santana Barrera. He was a guy who loved peace and quiet. He didn't like being around people like that, so that's why he decided to live there. And then one day, his peace was interrupted by a girl that he heard in the canal drowning. In a panic, he tries to save the girl, but then when he tries to save the girl, he realizes that it's already too late. The girl is already dead. A little bit after, a doll appears in the same exact spot that the girl had drowned in. As respect, he ends up hanging up the doll on a tree. But after that whole thing, that same night, he started hearing voices and screams of a little girl basically being tormented by these evil spirits that he said. So what he decided to do was collect dolls no matter where he got them from. If it was a garbage, no matter how they looked, and he would hang them on trees. He put them around his little hut. He believed that by doing this, it would please the girl's spirit and also keep away evil spirits, and every single doll represents an evil spirit. For the next 50 years, he collected dolls, and I'm not talking about a couple hundred dolls, bro. I'm talking about thousands of dolls. But around, I would say 2001, he ends up getting a heart attack. But where his body was found was the exact same spot that the girl died in.
Have people seen shit?
I'm gonna show you a clip because Ghost Adventures actually visited the island, and
these angels were allegedly killed by the last person you would ever expect. Scarlett and Isaac Palmley lived in Jefferson County, Missouri with their mum Ashley. Scarlett was 9 and Isaac was 2. They were described by loved ones as 2 sweet children who had nothing but love in their hearts. Isaac loved running around, being carefree, and playing with his toy cars. Scarlett loved softball and also telling anyone who would listen about her cute little brother. She was looking forward to starting 4th grade at her school, but tragically wouldn't survive long enough to make it. In 2020, their mum Ashley posted on Facebook that she was struggling with depression. She expressed isolating herself as a way to cope with her poor mental health. In one post, she stated that she was, quote, always questioning if the kids would be happier or better off without me being their primary caregiver, because I knew that they deserved a much better role model. Back in 1999, Ashley's uncle had actually killed both of her grandparents. Then, in more recent times, Ashley changed her profile picture to a black screen. People were a bit concerned about this. What did it mean and what was going on? On the 24th of May 2024, things would come to a horrific end. At 10:30 a.m, Ashley walked into a police station absolutely soaking wet. She told them that she had killed her children. She allegedly claimed that she got up that morning and placed her children into a car with her and took a gun. She was captured on CCTV driving around for a while until she became stationary. She then allegedly stopped the car and fired a weapon. Now, gunfire could apparently be heard on the recording. She allegedly shot both children and hadn't realised that her son wasn't dead until she heard him cry. It's reported that she then took him to Timber Creek Resort and drowned him. When she got to the police station, she made the staggering confession. In the boot of her car, she had her daughter's lifeless body. Her son's tiny body was found where he had been drowned. It's believed that Ashley could now be facing the rest of her life in prison.
I see a lot of interracial couples, and when I see an interracial couple, I think one of two things, and I don't believe I can't imagine that I'm unique in this. I think one of two things: either the guy couldn't do any better, or the girl's a whore.
The man you just saw in that despicable video was Scott Paul Beerley, and in 2018 he walked into a yoga studio and shot 6 women before taking his own life. Scott was a military veteran and was extremely conservative. And before his death, he was a member on a number of conservative websites. In the past, Scott had worked as a substitute teacher, but he was fired from these places of employment because he was acting inappropriately with the students. In one instance, asking a minor if they were ticklish while touching them below the bra line. As it was later found out, Scott was a member of the incel community, meaning involuntarily celibate. This community is a group of pissed off dudes who think that the reason why they can't ever find women and never get laid is because women just suck. Scott was one of those guys. And he posted frequent vlogs talking about his open misogyny, his hatred towards women, and yes, as you saw in that video clip, he was also against interracial marriage and was very racist. So on November 2nd, 2018, Scott had had enough. And he went out to go attack a predominantly female space, a local yoga studio in Tallahassee, Florida. And so he walked into a yoga studio full of people doing some workouts and opened fire on the women. Unfortunately, 2 women lost their lives in this attack. Their names were Nancy Van Vessem and Maura Binkley. And just 3.5 minutes into the attack, the police arrived and they found Scott dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. This was a big shock to the Tallahassee community, and there were a lot of events held to remember the victims' memories. But this is a story that shows we really need to watch people's online presence and the things that they post, that they talk about, because they oftentimes can be warning signs that are ignored. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available now on all streaming platforms.
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
Murder case inspired by the movie Scream. These 2 guys named Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk. They were 16 years old. Them wanted to be these amateur filmmakers led them to the idea of documenting everything, to the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddard, and mocked other serial killers, saying how like we're gonna be more famous than them, we're gonna be better than them.
We're gonna be murderers, baby. Like Ted Bundy, like the Hillside Strangler, the Zodiac Killer.
Those people are more amateurs compared to what we're gonna be.
On September 22nd, 2006, she was gonna house at her aunt and uncle's house, and that Friday, Cassie's boyfriend pulled up to the house to watch a movie. Also brought their classmate Brian and Tori. At some point during the night, Brian and Tori quote-unquote left the house, not knowing that before they left, Brian ended up going to the basement, unlocking the door, so then whenever they came back, it'll be easier for them to go inside. They go back inside, cut the power out from the electrical panel from from the basement. They make some noise trying to lure Cassie down, but it doesn't work. Eventually, the boyfriend, he ends up calling his mom, saying, can you pick me up or can I stay the night? Because he doesn't want to leave Cassie alone. The mom refuses, but says Cassie's welcome to come to our house. Cassie just says no because she took the responsibility of house setting. He leaves, and that's when Brian and Tori try to lure her with more noise, but it doesn't work. They get frustrated. They go to the living room where she's sleeping, and that's when they stab her 30 times. And then, since they were recording this whole they recorded the aftermath of them killing her.
This is not a fucking joke.
I'm sick.
I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie.
And also,
this huge pedophile operation